So good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Henning. I am the project director with Opening Doors Marin, and I will be serving as your MC this evening. First things first, I wanted to just preface that while many of us on the call this evening are in a lot of public meetings, we don't often host public meetings. So if there's any clunkiness or slow reply or anything tonight, our apologies in advance. We are doing 2 of these, so you're a little bit of our test group this evening. So thank you for bearing with us. Just briefly before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about what Opening Doors is. Opening Doors Marin is a public-private partnership that we've had in Marin County for the past few years. It represents city leaders, county leaders, philanthropy, business, social services, and our mission is to create the housing necessary to end chronic and veteran homelessness in our community. In 2017, according to a study from the Bay Area Economic Institute and McKinsey Consulting, Marin County had the 7th highest per capita rate of homelessness in the entire country. So that was a starting place for a lot of the change that you're going to hear about over the course of tonight's information session. Since October 1st of 2017, thanks to a new strategy and new investment from the county and our partners, we've housed over 400 of the most vulnerable long-term chronically homeless people in our community. And we've also reduced veteran homelessness by over 60%. And while this progress has been significant, even just last night, as grateful as I am for the rain and the drought is hopefully starting to get addressed, this also marks the most difficult time of year for those of us in social services, for the folks that are still outside and are exposed to the elements, to the wet and the cold. And so really, we all know that the solution to this crisis is more housing. To that point, that's really what tonight is about. The state of California has released a new program called Project Home Key, which you'll be hearing more about momentarily. And it has created an opportunity, a somewhat unprecedented opportunity for communities throughout the state to rapidly create new housing for people experiencing homelessness. So tonight, we want to just acknowledge right up front that this program, and again, we'll describe more about it, and I'm sure you've heard something about it in the past, is way faster than anything that we're used to doing in our community. Often affordable housing and housing development takes many years. And the state through Project Home Key is asking us to move at the speed of months. And so it's shocking for us. There are moments of frustration, as I'm sure there are for you as you're just learning about this. There's also, I know from what we've seen, a lot of elation and happiness as well, that things are happening quickly. So we just want to acknowledge up front that there's certainly a range of emotions and opinions, and we hope to be able to address any questions or concerns tonight. So with that, I'm going to ask all of my colleagues to please start sharing their camera so we can introduce the panel tonight. And I'm just going to go across the top of my screen, and let's start with Ken.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Shapiro, the COO and Chief Assistant Director at the county's Department of Health and Human Services.
Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Hart-McIntyre, Homelessness Policy Analyst with Marin County Health and Human Services.
Beth.
Hi, good evening. I'm Beth Stokes, the Executive Director of Episcopal Community Services.
Kevin.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kevin Kitchingham, Director of Housing Development at Episcopal Community Services.
And Zach.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Zach Fournette. I'm a Director of Ground Floor Public Affairs. We represent Episcopal Community Services and help support their community engagement efforts throughout the Bay Area.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So we have a brief presentation for you this evening that Ken is going to present. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as we're getting going, I just wanted to say, just brief ground rule. There's not a chat for this event, and we'll talk a little bit more about how the Q&A is going to proceed here in a second, but there is a Q&A button down at the bottom. I see at least the number 2 for 2 notifications related to it. I don't know if others are seeing that. Certainly the panel probably is, but I just wanted to ask if folks could please hold questions till the presentation's done, just because the numbers and the notifications start popping up during the presentation. So just if you could please hold your questions till the end. We have plenty of time for Q&A and want to make sure that we address everything that comes up. So with that, I'm going to pull up the presentation and start sharing. And so again, you met our panel, and I'll be moderating. And then I'll actually describe how we're going to do public comment at the very end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken, who is going to be walking you through information about Home Key and this project. So Ken, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. And tonight, if you could actually go back for a minute, if you would. Tonight, we'll describe a little bit about the overall strategies to end chronic homelessness in Marin and how this proposed site on South Eliseo fits into that larger strategy. I'm just going to walk you through a short set of slides to explain the project, the timeline, financing, program supports, and our plans around community engagement. And we will be quick. We don't want to spend most of the time on slides talking to you. We want to listen to the community and answer your questions. I think that's the richest part of the program this evening. So please just rest assured that we're not going to be talking at you. For the most part, we're going to be listening to you and responding to your questions. But it is important, we think, to set a little bit of context and to give you the facts about this site as they are today so that we can have a rich dialogue. Next slide, please, Andrew. So, there we go. All right. So chronic homelessness is used to describe people who have experienced homelessness for at least a year or repeatedly while struggling with a disabling condition. These are people for whom housing is truly healthcare. During the last point in time count here in Marin, a little over 1,000 individuals were estimated to be experiencing homelessness. That was in January of 2019. And I know that you are not homeless experts, many of you, so I just described that a point in time count is something that every community in America is required to do. You must do a census and take a count and get a best estimate of the number of people experiencing homelessness in every community across the United States of America every 2 years. We did not conduct a full point in time count in Marin, just like many other communities across the country. Because of COVID would have been unsafe and difficult to conduct in 2021. But that gives us our best estimate from 2019. It was 1,000 individuals. Chronic homelessness is, as Andrew mentioned, not a new problem. And in Marin, we've been highly successful over the past 4 years in reducing the numbers of people experiencing chronic homelessness because of some really major systems changes we made here in Marin. As a result of those changes and very strong collaborative efforts among many of the providers across Marin and the county, we moved from 216 permanent units of supportive housing to 629 units from 2016 to 2021. And I'll describe on a slide coming up exactly what permanent supportive housing is. These efforts have resulted in one person experiencing homelessness moving from homelessness to housed every 3.6 days for the past 4 years. There are time-limited one-time resources being made available to help Marin accelerate our already highly successful efforts to reduce chronic homelessness. Tonight, we'll talk about the site at 1251 South Eliseo and our vision for converting that site into permanent homes. The persons we plan to help at the site we'll discuss this evening are individuals who predominantly lived in Marin when they became homeless. They went to Drake, they went to Redwood, they went to Tam, they went to Novato. They're people from Marin for the most part. They grew up here, went to our schools, and lost their homes while living here. At its essence, Project Room Key is an opportunity for communities to leverage state and federal funding to develop permanent supportive housing units. Marin was successful in round one of Project Home Key in 2020 and purchased 2 facilities, one in Corte Madera and one in San Rafael. We'll break ground on the Corte Madera site in just 9 days and expect to open its doors to permanent residents in approximately 5 to 6 months. In anticipation of the current second round of Project Home Key, we released an RFP, or a request for proposals, seeking a development partner. We issued that RFP in May of 2021, and we chose our partner, Episcopal Community Services, who you'll hear from this evening, in June. Episcopal has a long history of success developing and managing permanent supportive housing projects and currently manage 1,600 units of housing and maintain a 95% retention rate. Next slide, please. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this property. It's been sitting vacant for at least 6 years over on South Eliseo Drive. It's a former skilled nursing facility, or what's commonly called a nursing home. We believe the site will support somewhere between 43 and 50 units of housing. The plans and the numbers that we'll show you tonight are based on 43, but once we move further along and get into drawings and working with architects, that number could shift a little bit, but we are confident it will be between 43 and 50 units. The building and site, as I said, have been sitting vacant for 6 or more years. Is currently zoned for the use we are planning and is located very close to key medical facilities. And while the building will require extensive renovations, it's already set up to be ADA accessible with wide hallways and doorways. That's a very rare and valuable feature in a renovation project of this sort. Next slide, please, Andrew. We plan to convert the facility to permanent supportive housing, a best practice in housing for people formerly experiencing homelessness. This model includes an on-site property manager, case management, a 24/7 person at the front desk, and health services. It's a robust model of support. Residents will be referred through the county's coordinated entry system, will have long histories of homelessness, and will have a disability of some sort. I just want to describe quickly the purpose of a coordinated entry system. A coordinated entry system, which we adopted here in Marin in 2017, ensures that all people experiencing homelessness have fair and equal access to resources. Participants are identified, assessed for, and connected to available housing and homeless services based on their needs. The system uses standardized tools and practices, incorporates systems-wide housing first approaches in an environment, does all this in an environment of scarce resources. It coordinates housing supports to prioritize those with the highest needs. Another way to think about this is very similar to organ donation systems, emergency departments, or the most recent example is COVID vaccines. Those who have the greatest need have first access to those resources. So if you're sitting in an emergency room and you've broken your arm, someone comes in with a gunshot wound, they will be seen before you. It's the same way that coordinated entry works. Very importantly, I want to clarify that we have no plans for this site to be a shelter. It will not be a shelter. Residents will have leases. They'll pay 30% of their income in rent. It will hold a lease. There will be house rules similar to other supportive housing facilities, and will only provide services to individuals who live there. It will not be and will not attract a transitory population and congregations of individuals. It will not be a site with heavy turnover. It will be a place where people sign a lease, end their homelessness, and begin to heal. It will not be a shelter. Next slide, please, Andrew. This table reflects the estimated overall and per door costs for the South Eliseo property. And again, these are built on the assumption of 43 units. And this just shows the scale of leverage available under this novel program. The County of Marin's contribution per unit is $186,000. And the total development costs, including the matching funds we can pull through Project Home Key, are $488,000 per unit. To fund the ongoing operation costs associated with permanent supportive housing will rely in large part on the revenue of federal vouchers. Federal vouchers bring with them fair market value and a guaranteed revenue source for the owner of the property. Again, the resident must contribute 30% of their income toward the rent, and the balance is a guaranteed payment. And that's how we're able to make a property of this sort work, by using that revenue to generate the services necessary that make it permanent supportive housing at the level we envision. Use of federal vouchers will prohibit any registered sex offenders from holding a lease at this property. And again, in this round of Project Home Key, there's a richer operating subsidy, and we expect somewhere in the neighborhood of a $3 million infusion from the state if we're successful in our application. Lastly, ECS, Episcopal Community Services, working with my department to become a Medi-Cal provider, and that would be yet another source of revenue for them to provide the necessary services on site. They are a registered Medi-Cal provider in San Francisco. Next slide, please. As far as community engagement, as Andrew mentioned, this is moving at the speed of months, not years. This is unusual in development, and we want to recognize that. We did hold 10 community meetings back in the spring in anticipation of this round of Home Key to explain it. We collected feedback from Marin residents. We posted those videos of those 10 community meetings. to the Opening Doors Marin YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and search Opening Doors Marin, you'll be able to find those. We've been meeting with many of the building's neighbors, key community stakeholders, and tonight is the first of 2 community meetings. We'll continue to engage and listen to the community and make adjustments to the project that are possible based on what we hear from you. If the state awards the funding and we proceed to purchase, we will establish a community advisory group. We use this exact same approach in Corte Madera. Corte Madera has been very successful in ensuring that resident and neighbor concerns are heard, acted upon, and I think they're quite satisfied with that process. Our next community meeting will be November 4th at the same time as this evening. And we've also developed a website which further explains many of the concepts I've breezed through this evening on these slides, and has a very lengthy FAQ section, and we have the link there. And just lastly, on this slide, if you're interested in ensuring that you get any communications about this project, please send an email to either of those email addresses you see listed there, and we'll be sure that you're included in any communications moving forward. Last slide, please, Andrew. This is just a broad overview of the timeline for this project. We intend to apply to the state for funding November 5th. The state has told us that we'll hear back from them in December. If we're successful, we would move toward acquisition of the property in January and attempt to begin construction as soon thereafter as possible, as early as February. Right now, the state is requiring construction is completed within 12 months of award. So our goal would be to start leasing properties and units to individuals in December of 2022. That's the end of the formal presentation. If you want to pull the slides away, Andrew, and take back over the MC role.
Yes, thank you, Ken, very much for that. So at this point, we're going to shift over to question and answer, as well as if there are other comments that folks have after the presentation. So the way we're going to do this is, if I could have the rest of the panel turn your cameras back on. So there are basically 2 options for this. We have the Q&A button at the very bottom. So it looks like we already had some questions come in. So I can read those questions to the group. And then the other option is, and this again is a little bit different from if you've been to any city or county public meetings. Most of the time, if you're an attendee, you can raise your hand to request to speak. That is still going to be happening, but rather than just allowing you to speak as an attendee, we'd like to at least present the opportunity to make this a little bit more personal. And I will be promoting attendees to be a panelist. So you'll be joining those of us on screen. You can either share your screen, and then we can all see you, or you can not share your screen if you don't feel comfortable doing that, and still make your comment. It looks like we have about 60 attendees. In my experience, not everyone speaks at these meetings or asks a question, but given that we could have a lot of questions and comments, we would ask that folks please limit their questions or comments to about 2 minutes if possible. We'll be flexible on that. I'm not going to run the clock on you, but if we could please keep those really, again, dialed into about two minutes or so, that'd be great. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and start with the folks that have raised their hands. Then I'll kind of jump back and forth between people that have raised their hands and then the questions that have come in through the Q&A box. So with that, and again, please bear with us. This is the first time we've tried this. So I'm going to, let's start with Chuck Finney, and I will promote Chuck to be a panelist, and we'll see how this goes. Hopefully he's able to join us. So Chuck, I think you're now a panelist if you'd like to share your screen. Otherwise, again, feel free to just unmute and share your feedback or questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Again, my name is Chuck Finney. I'm a neighbor of this property. I live up the hill at the Spyglass Hill condominium complex, and appreciate you guys holding this first community meeting on the project. I have a question. Generally, it's about kind of the operation of the permanent supportive housing community that will be developed there. generally, I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about what housing first means in terms of, just kind of the condition that folks are in when they're arriving as new residents at the property, and how Episcopal Community Services and County Marin sort of manages that congregating piece about kind of around house rules and the coming and going. And lastly, maybe in the context of talking about that, if there's a project that's nearby that, there has been some success, say, that is similar to this, that, we could have some assurance that, we're seeing some success in these projects. I'd love to hear about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. So if one of our panelists that wants to address that question or those questions wants to start, feel free. And Chuck, don't be offended. I'm going to go ahead and devote you back to attendees. Yep. So thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the question. I'll jump in, Andrew and Ashley, Ken, if you have anything else to add. So housing first, it's definitely kind of a approach, a modality, some would call it, in terms of a strategy for housing folks that are, unhoused. And what that looks like is that we're not requiring people to check off boxes before they're housing ready. So that was something that, used to occur many, many years ago. And folks across the country have shifted to a housing first model, which really means that, folks that are unhoused can stabilize in housing, and housing needs to be the first priority for folks that are homeless. And it's as simple as that, is that we really believe that housing needs to be upfront. Housing is the solution to ending homelessness. And for those that are chronically homeless, supportive housing, as Ken was stating, is a proven intervention for folks that are chronically homeless with disabilities. The profile, the question was asked about folks that, come into supportive housing, with the housing first model in place. And a typical profile of someone in one of our, buildings at Episcopal Community Services is someone who is age 55, right, on average, in terms of the age of the population. That population age actually in the past year in our portfolio has increased by 5 years. So we are ourselves as one organization seeing an aging population of those that are unhoused. In addition to that, what you're going to see is an average of one disability per person that comes into supportive housing. And that's definitely what we see. Folks generally come in with one, but there's a strong population of folks that are coming in with multiple disabilities into supportive housing, which is, goes to the belief that housing is a social determinant of health, and that housing, particularly supportive housing, is healthcare. And we really buy into that notion, and we've seen that bear out in terms of people stabilizing in supportive housing and leaving, very dignified, quality lives when they're in supportive housing. In addition to that, the profile of the population that comes in, about 75% are on Medicaid, and 14% have Medicare. So you're seeing a population that comes in that, to my point earlier, has pretty significant disabilities, which is why there are services provided on site. What those services look like on site, as Ken also was stating in his PowerPoint, is a 1:17 ratio of case managers to individuals there. And that means that those case managers are working on site to care coordinate and really connect people with a very high population of folks that need to be connected to medical care, making that connection. So that looks like helping people identify primary healthcare providers. For some, for the first time, it could be in years, and others decades. And so it's really important that in supportive housing that we do find a primary healthcare provider, and that we are immediately starting to work in addressing those issues that folks come in with. Both physical healthcare needs as well as behavioral healthcare needs are being addressed. So I'll stop there. What house rules, let me answer that question, is that and the comings and goings, question from Chuck. And that is that, it is supportive housing, and folks it's their permanent home, right? It's their home. And so folks have a lease, and that lease has, you know, kind of, you know, rules around following, you know, kind of the standards in, you know, kind of an apartment type of setting. That doesn't restrict them from, you know, exiting and entering the facility. It does have, we typically will have restrictions on the number of visitors into the building. We'll have, you know, limitations around smoking. I know that there, you know, particularly in Larkspur, there's, you know, their own ordinances around smoking. So we abide by all local regulations and ordinances in the community. And there's just generally being a good neighbor, you know, and that would look like noise ordinances, you know, not playing your music loud after a certain time, and just being respectful to one another as neighbors, just to mention a few.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. And I think it also came up in the question that from Chuck, that what are some examples of other projects that we could maybe benchmark to as being similar? And maybe, you know, Ken, you mentioned the Corte Madera project. I can certainly speak to that, but I don't know if you or Ashley want to speak about some of the other permanent supportive housing that's near here or that has been successful throughout the county.
Yeah, actually, Ashley, if you could talk about the King Street project, because we have a question in the chat about whether we're familiar with Homeward Bound. It's a good opportunity to sort of answer both questions at once.
So very familiar with Homeward Bound. They're good friends. We love working with Homeward Bound. They do wonderful work. They did not have the capacity to apply to be part of this project this year because they're very busy working on the projects that we acquired in last year's Home Key program. There is a project actually in Larkspur that opened 3 or 4 years ago on King Street. It's a former convent, I think.
Convent. Yep.
And it's a 12-unit project. It's in a residential neighborhood. I know there were lots of concerns from the community before it went in, and in the end, the community, the surrounding neighborhood, has really embraced the project significantly. Has not seen a decrease in property values. The program, they're good neighbors. And the community has really embraced the opportunity to volunteer and support those new residents.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much. We're starting to answer a few of the questions that we can in the chat itself. One of the questions that came up was, this question's from Mark, is Ken said that there would be a person at the front desk 24/7, and that was basically confirmed. So I was wondering maybe Zach and Beth, if you wanted to respond to that. And then relatedly, there were 2 questions that we'll answer. Then we'll go back to a live person who wants to share their feedback or question. But basically the question was, you know, in ECS's experience, what does a typical day look like for residents? What is it that they're doing? And then related to that, there is a park adjacent to this property. So there was a question about, does part of that day-to-day activity, you know, involve the park, and what might that look like? So I'll turn it over to you all to answer kind of some of those operational day-to-day questions.
Yeah, happy to. Great question. In regards to, I know you just answered the 24/7, you know, front desk. It's very standard, you know, in supportive housing settings to have someone at the front of the building greeting folks and, you know, signing folks in, and also, you know, checking guests and things like that. So there's always a presence in the front of the building in supportive housing sites typically. It's not, I would say, standard 100% of the time, but it's certainly standard within ECS's portfolio. So that'll be the case. A typical day for someone who's in a supportive housing setting, you know, it's varied. I'll say that, as every individual coming in is varied. Our support services staff is working with each person on a plan. You know, it's something that they engage with the residents right away to kind of figure out what is happening with them and what their priorities are. For some folks, it might be having eye surgery, right? And then from there, going into figuring out how to get their hip replaced because they're having difficulty walking. For others, it's simply getting eyeglasses. You know, it could look like in one day we have groups available to folks, or social activity on another day. It's not something where folks have any kind of it's not a program, it's housing. So I just need to make that distinction. They're not programmed, but we do offer a variety of different services that they can elect to participate in. The key around supportive housing and quality supportive housing is providing the type of services that the community needs by getting feedback from those residents to identify what's important to them in terms of social activities, in terms of shared meals in the community. We do a lot of meal sharing and conversation. As we're moving away from COVID, that has been put on pause a bit, but we do provide folks with some type of meal support. Majority of folks living in supportive housing are food insecure and really need a lot of help in accessing dry goods and other foods, and sometimes hot meals to round out their day in terms of being able to acquire food. So a lot of activities around food, a lot of activities around potentially therapeutic groups, engagement with other healthcare providers. FQHCs is the intention in the community, so that we can, bring in potentially a Zumba class, or we can ensure that folks have access to dental care, which is a huge need and one of the top needs for folks that are moving into supportive housing. In addition to that, we're really kind of, working every day around just, stabilization. And for some folks, it can be as simple as, meeting with their case manager and or meeting with our healthy aging director, as we're trying to ensure that folks are not isolating, because we have an aging population. We want to ensure that as folks are aging in housing, that they're not isolating. So different activities will be provided. And like I said before, games, and folks do like to get out. So if they're going to go to the park, it might be that they walk over to the park and back. If it is something that the case management support staff deem that the community wants, to do some type of activity in the park, then they would attempt to do that, or do make that happen for the residents.
Great, thank you for that. And again, I would just echo what Ken said during his presentation, that this really is permanent housing. So this isn't a program where people are really going in and out. It's really, these are residents in the neighborhood, so they would be enjoying local amenities like anyone else. But again, it's not this kind of coming and going like you might expect in other programming. I'm going to just hit one more thing that came up in the chat to make sure everyone heard it. There was that question about ages for likely residents. Ashley shared that 30% of the people that we've been housing the past few years are between 25 and 45. Another third are from 46 to 60, and another third on top of that are 61 plus. And it is worth noting, as Ashley said, that for people experiencing long-term chronic homelessness, which is really the group that we're trying to support with this program, studies have found that those folks pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from a single night of cold or wet weather, though that certainly does not help, but instead from long-term chronic health issues that are going unaddressed. So many people don't even make it to be a senior, even though their medical age actually is much more advanced than they actually would otherwise present. So with that, Amanda had a question in the chat about contact to the HOAs, and I also see Amanda's hand is raised. So Amanda, I will promote you if you want to ask that again, or if you have something else, feel free to, again, either share video or just speak verbally, whatever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So two things. Yeah, this is just the reason that our building even heard about it was because somebody put down a flyer that was incredibly against this and with not all accurate information. That was the first that all of us heard about it. So when you say that you sent letters to the HOAs along South Eliseo between Corte Real and Bon Air, I mean, we didn't have any information at all, which was quite shocking for everybody. The other question was, I saw in the chat that, so someone asked, are all sex offenders or only lifetime registration sex offenders? And the answer was not all sex offenders, only those that have lifetime. So that's concerning to me as a parent of a 14-year-old who walks to school and back pass this property every day, as do many, many, many school children. I would like to ask, like, so can someone confirm or not that there is a possibility that sex offenders will be housed here?
Yes. And so Amanda, thank you for that. So we will cover both of those. So I'm going to go ahead and shift you back to being an attendee. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to answer that, feel free to jump in.
Can we have Zach answer the first question, respond to the first about HOAs and reaching out in contact with the HOAs?
Yes, so letters were sent to the addresses listed on South Eliseo Drive in between 875, which is where South Eliseo Drive intersects with Corte Real, and the other side of the street all the way up to Bon Air. And so I think those addresses start at 875 and continue throughout the 1100 block. I think the last one would be 1155 South Eliseo Drive before the 1200 block becomes the medical campus. And so if people have not received those letters, we will look into it and endeavor to make sure that they are properly contacted. I have also shared my email address, which I would encourage anyone who's HOA board or interested members of the community, neighbors, friends, et cetera, to reach out to me directly, and we can make sure that we're coordinating with the group's neighborhood stakeholders appropriately.
So in terms of the question about sex offenders, this is a housing authority voucher. So housing authority vouchers, it's a federal program. So it does prevent lifetime registered sex offenders from entering the facility. The other classifications, if it's not a lifetime sex offender, would then be eligible to participate in this property in terms of supportive housing, which is not uncommon in supportive housing. Generally, not every supportive housing site is a housing authority voucher or has kind of a federal subsidy attached to it. This one does, so it comes with its own restrictions around entry into the property. So it does have the registered sex offender lifetime registration prohibition, but not for the other categories that present.
Great. Thanks for answering that, Beth. So why don't we go back to the Q&A? And there was a quick question I think we can answer, which was, who cooks food for the residents? Do they have individual kitchens and bathrooms? I think there was the answer that, and Kevin, maybe you could address this. Each of the units does have an individual bathroom, but maybe around food or other services if someone wants to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So Kevin, you can as well. The intention is always to have some type of small kitchenette or kitchen in supportive housing due to the size of the current units. Building in kitchens into these units wouldn't be possible, but we are looking at having the ability to warm up food, some type of kitchenette, if we're able to. So that's what we're looking at now in terms of the design. That's what we've tasked the architects with helping us to figure out. In addition to that, we will be building out a community kitchen and kind of a community eating area on the property. So folks typically in supportive housing, cook their own meals and or, work to get their meals on their own. Generally, but folks will support in a hot food meal program at a really high rate if it's offered. So I do want to state that if funding is available for some type of hot meal program, the majority of participants will come down and support that type of program.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth. Next up, there was a comment from Catherine Way, who's a council member for the city of Larkspur. She and Scott Candle are actually the Larkspur City Council representatives for this effort. So I see among our folks that have raised their hands, Scott is part of that group. So Scott, why don't I go ahead and promote you? And if you would like to share anything more about the partnership that's been going on with the city and any other perspective that you think would be valuable, feel free to ask away or share away.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I will be direct and to the point from my constituents. I have heard some concerns. They really revolve around drug use and mental health issues. The drug use, first question is, do you do any type of testing, drug testing upon an application to make sure that somebody coming into the unit does not have drug addiction issues? Is there testing in order as a condition to keep your lease? How do we deal with problems that may arise? I mean, if we take a population, homeless population, and let's say we have a 90% success rate, which would be incredible, and we bring 50 people into this facility, that means we have 5 failures, which to some people, this means we have now 5 homeless people living on South Eliseo with drug addiction issues, panhandling, harassing kids on the way to school. We're bringing people into this community. What is the plan if it doesn't work out? What happens to these people? Mental health issues, is there some type of screening that takes place to make sure that there's not a potential danger to the community? I mean, so I think these are the concerns of the community that I'm hearing. And I would love to hear what safeguards are going to be in place to assure that the community can feel that this is going to be a benefit and limit the potential downside. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Council Member. I will go ahead and move you back to attendee for now. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Ashley, do you want to take kind of the first part of that around the folks we're serving and some of the challenges that they might be experiencing, what that sort of has looked like in our system of care?
Sure. So we have data from our homeless point in time counts, which we do, I think, as Ken mentioned, every couple of years. We conduct surveys as part of that, and we have information on some of the disabilities that people are facing. And this is where I would usually put the link to that report in the chat. We don't have the chat, so I'll figure out how to get that shared with you. You're welcome to review it. We have folks who we're serving. Certainly some of them do have some mental illness issues or substance use issues, but we find that it's not significantly out of proportion to the percentage of people in the general population who struggle with some of those issues. What is true is that unsheltered homelessness particularly really exacerbates those issues. It's very difficult to access treatment, to be medication compliant, to go to therapy, to do any of these things when you're not really sure where you're going to sleep tonight or where your next meal is coming from. And once people are placed into a stable, permanent housing and provided with support services, we see mental health stabilize and substance use decrease or be eliminated altogether. The model that we're using, Housing First, this is not an experimental model. I want to be really clear about that. This is something that has been, it's a 30-plus-year-old model. It's been subject to peer-reviewed studies in communities across the country, large, small, suburban, rural, urban, all kinds of different places. It's very well respected. It works really well. And that's why our federal and state funders really require that we adhere to it, because we know that this is what works. It is the priority of everybody involved here to keep both the residents of our program safe, but also the community. If it doesn't work for the community, it's not going to work for our residents either. So we design our programs so that people's needs are met, whatever they may be, whether they are physical disability accommodations that we need to accommodate, or mental health or behavioral health, other behavioral health challenges.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Ashley. And just to piggyback on that, and this is, I see Carol, I think it's Poseen, asked this question: if a resident creates problems in the community, will they be placed elsewhere? And this sort of goes back to the council member's question as well. Maybe I'll take a crack at this unless someone wants to add to this, but I would say for all the folks that we've housed, that we mentioned housing the past few years, the over 400 people, 94% of those people are still housed. And when you really boil down our outcomes, we've been asking 3 core questions. Are we working with the most vulnerable? Are we getting them housed? And are they staying housed? Part of that is the recognition that housing first works for a lot of people. And sometimes a given housing placement is not the right fit for whatever reason. Maybe the community's not right, or maybe they're isolated and need to be in community, or vice versa. And so our commitment as a system of service providers that extends beyond even ECS is St. Vincent de Paul, Homeward Bound, the Ritter Center, is that when certain people are not maybe struggling in a certain housing placement, we work together to make sure that we get them into an appropriate placement. So as a system, we are committed to that. It's not things aren't working, you're evicted to the street in front of the building. It is, how do we do a warm handoff to another provider for a more appropriate setting? So I think that's very key. And then also, just to plug ECS for a minute, their retention rate is 98% in their permanent supportive housing. So we have a lot to even learn from them to get our rate even closer to 100. So just to answer your question, Carol. We'll do one more kind of couple from the Q&A, then go back to a live question. There was a question from Patty about such an important project. How can we best support the effort to create more home key opportunities? And I sort of see that as being related to Alan's question, which is, does a project of this nature, quote unquote, compete for funding among other deserving projects? And then some projects get funded and some don't. Are they evaluated in different ways? And how does that decided? So maybe that's a question for the county again, around just the general home key process.
I think Zach wants to chime in on this question.
Sorry there, I was struggling to get myself off mute. First of all, thank you, Pat, for that question. We really appreciate your support of our efforts. And I'm not sure if Andrew or Ken has addressed it, but this home key effort is an ongoing process. There is a rolling application from the state. And what that means is that we are looking for other sites across Marin County for other potential home key projects. And so I think that, in terms of this particular proposal, I think the best way that you can support it is to continue to stay engaged, engaged with ECS and the county teams and myself and all of the folks who are working to ensure that this project's going to be a success. But also, if your neighbors, your friends, people at the grocery store you're talking to have questions or concerns, I think really we would greatly appreciate, you directing them to the website, to the county's website, to Episcopal Community Services website, or again, I think I've shared my email a number of times in the chat, feel free to direct them to myself as well, so we can make sure that folks are receiving the proper and most accurate information about what the project proposal is. But certainly if we get a little further down the road and are prepared to announce a second site, if you've got friends or neighborhood or neighbors who have connections to other parts of Marin County, I think the same goes for that as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. Why don't we go back to a live new panelist? So I'm going to go ahead and promote Diane. So Diane, I am putting you to panelist. And again, feel free to share video or simply unmute yourself and you can share your comments. And Diane, you're still muted, just in case. We'll give it another second or two.
Go. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. Go ahead.
Okay. So a couple of comments. We're property owners on South Eliseo. Also we're in the 900 series and did not receive any information on this project. Aside from that, I've worked all of my adult life to be able to afford a waterfront property in Marin County. And I'm concerned very much from a real estate standpoint, what your facility is going to do to the neighborhood on property values. That's one of my issues. Another issue is that this property, from what I'm told before we were ever owners here, was some sort of a women's shelter a number of years ago. And it was pretty much of a disaster to the neighborhood, with a lot of petty thievery and people's cars being stolen, and friends and vagrants of the people who live there became a real issue. I'm concerned from that standpoint. I'm concerned about the Hamilton Park next door. If you're not going to let the people smoke on site, that the little park would probably become the place for them to smoke, and who's going to clean all that up? I'm concerned that not only about the smoking, about alcohol use, petty theft, trash in the street and in the park, and making it very unsafe for those of us who have pets and animals. I don't have children, but I do walk my dogs up and down that street on a regular basis. And I just do not feel comfortable having this facility in the neighborhood. And one other question I have is, what kind of disabilities will these people have? And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Diane, for sharing that. I will go ahead and move you back to attendee. And just to build on this, I'm kind of looking through the chat at the same time to see if there's any overlap. It looks like there was questions from Michael and Janet, sort of a similar effect, just around, potential issues in the neighborhood. So I think we spoke to this a little bit, but does anyone else want to address this again, or?
Sure. I mean, I think what I'll say is that, often the supportive housing sites in communities, it's not a shelter, as was communicated before. So it's not going to have short-term folks coming in and out of the property. It's going to have people who live there, call it home, and who could be there for many, many, many years. A lot of folks do engage in kind of transition, planning, because folks both come into this housing, live there, and often pass away, while they're residents of the property. So it is their home. And so there's not a lot of kind of loitering, outside of their property, because they have a home, and they're not, necessarily, coming in and out all the time as folks who live in some type of an apartment setting. They would actually probably move in and out of the front or back of the property or sides of a property less than someone who hasn't been experienced homelessness. They generally kind of stay within the proximity, but not, they can come and go as they wish, because they experienced homelessness, now they're housed. So they come and go with freedom. And so that's the distinction I really want to make sure I make. But often in supportive housing for ECS, these properties are something that ECS and our board take a risk in owning, right? And so as you are a property owner, ECS would be a property owner as well. We take great pride in rehabbing and developing properties. We ensure that the property itself is well cared for and distinguishable in the neighborhood, and a property that neighbors would look at and say, "Wow, that's can I live in that apartment building or that loft?" Often folks say that when they look at one of our properties, thinking it's something that folks can rent or live in or purchase. And so it's something that is very, very important to us and the board of directors at ECS to maintain a quality property on the outside, on the inside. And so it's something I think that the community ultimately would be proud of in short order, even within the next 12 months, if this property is funded.
That's great. Thank you, Beth. And looking down, we'll do just maybe kind of two more questions from the Q&A and then back to a live comment. Building on that, there was a question from TR. Will there be any criteria or deadlines to measure whether or not the project is a success? And then there was also, again, which I think we've touched on a little bit, but in case others want to chime in on this, again, concerns about the amount of communication and not receiving communication yet. I did want to share with the group, I don't think we've really gone into detail about this yet, but except it was mentioned that in Home Key 1, we also did a successful project in Corte Madera. And part of that effort led to the creation of a community advisory group, which actually formed last December. The town of Corte Madera helped facilitate the creation of that. It includes town council members, the county, residents, service providers. And that group has tackled as explicit work streams many of the things that have been raised here around program evaluation, communication with the surrounding neighborhood, exterior redesign, and then also volunteer opportunities. So actually for folks that want to get involved with the site to help make it a success, really get involved, how can they do that? So in terms of, both the communication and the, again, potential evaluation of the site, I'm wondering if someone could speak to the vision around the community advisory group and where that might stand.
Zach, I'll start off and then please jump in. I think, we did speak with Corte Madera but ECS already has experience with putting together advisory groups around supportive housing developments. We currently have one operating called, it's the Stevenson Alley Advisory Group with a property that we are building in new construction in San Francisco. And that is a group that's really working on the street, the Stevenson Alley, which has been prior to this new construction, has been a problem area in the community. And so coming into the community and wanting to add value, which this property certainly will. We also know how important it is with all of our neighbors on Market Street and in this alley to come together and work through both construction issues and post-construction issues. So our relationship with the community advisory group is very consistent. We get their feedback. And it's a variety of different stakeholders. So it's going to be business owners. It's folks that actually are in an HOA. That's behind the property, as well as we regularly like to have representation from the local police department, and we have that at this site. We actually have representation from 2 police district stations in San Francisco. And that's because we always want to understand what's happening in terms of the baseline crime in the area, even before this property opens or is developed. And then what's the trend once the property opens? And that's a really important partnership and relationship that we want to be able to engage in as a community, as an advisory group, addressing any issues that might be in the neighborhood that folks are concerned about. Because, the neighbors, the folks that are living in supportive housing, as many of us have stated, they also, want safety and want security in their neighborhood, in their housing. And so it's really important that often you'll have a member of someone living in the building as a participant in the advisory groups, or from another local nearby supportive housing development. But we think it's critical. We think it's important. ECS is very committed to a community advisory group, as well as, any other efforts around being, developing a good neighbor policy through this group, and ensuring that, that ECS is fully embodying that good neighbor policy along with the rest of our neighbors.
Great, thank you, Beth. So why don't we go back to live attendees, and I'm going to go ahead and promote Jean. So Jean, feel free to, again, either share video or simply unmute, and you can share your comments or questions.
Thank you so much. I live with my family in Green Bay, and my in-laws live in Corte Real condos just a block away from this proposed site. And so we go with the kids weekly, a couple times a week. We go visit the grandparents. There's Hal Brown Park across the street. We use the bike path on the weekends. And do you know what the best part about doing that is? The best part about visiting the folks and being able to use the bike path or the park is that I feel safe. And I don't run into a single homeless person. And none of you can guarantee the safety of me, my family, my kids, other people in the neighborhood with homeless people in this area. And what I find to be frankly deceitful in your messaging is that you're not trying to take the homeless people off the street in our neighborhood and house them, which I think everybody would support. But what you are asking to do is to transfer homeless people off the street and bring them over into our neighborhood which does not have homeless people, and add homeless people to our neighborhood, adding less safety and less comfort to the residents around that area. And I have a feeling that none of you really live in this neighborhood, because had you really examined this site and understood that there's a park right next door, lots of kids going to schools, bike paths, none of you really would want to have a less safety in the neighborhood. And so I guess my question is, at this point, I guess I'm just wondering, who are you guys to make decisions for our neighborhood? And second, what can we do in this portion of the process in order to potentially stop this project from occurring? Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Does anyone want to address that? Maybe Ashley or Ken to start?
Ashley, do you want to go first, and then I can go as well?
Sure. So I'll address the piece about the Larkspur community versus the whole community. So what we see with the folks that we serve here in Marin is that they are almost the vast majority are local folks, as Ken mentioned in his presentation. These are folks who grew up in Marin in many cases. We know that many of the folks that we're serving, around half, have lived here for more than 10 years before they lost their housing. These are our neighbors, and they came from all over Marin, not just San Rafael and Novato, where you see the most visible homelessness. They came from Ross, they came from Tiburon, they came from Point Reyes Station, they came from all over our community. And because of that, housing countywide is unaffordable. And this is it's a countywide issue to address homelessness here for countywide neighbors. There are projects in communities across Marin that are not serving necessarily folks who became homeless in that community or who experienced homelessness in that community, but most of them are from here. Ken, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, and it's it's a requirement of ours that we serve everyone in Marin. That's the purview and the requirement, and we can't discriminate and place people based on where they live. We have to serve everyone in the county. It's a requirement. It's a federal requirement that governs our work. I'm a Marin resident. I live in Novato. My children go to school a stone's throw from the Homeward Bound shelter in Novato. The library is right there. My children spend time after school at that library. There's permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter right there, right next to where my children go to school. I completely understand your concerns, Gene, and I also feel safe with my children going to school and walking to the library next to Homeward Bound's facilities.
Thanks for that, Ken. Why don't we do another live question or comment? And Linda, it looks like you're next. So I will go ahead and promote you to panelist. And again, feel free to share video or simply unmute and you can share that way. And Linda, we can see your name, but if you want to click unmute or share video, we can give it another sec. Okay, Linda, why don't we come back to you and why don't we try Andrea or Andrea? I'll go ahead and promote you to panelist at this time.
Hi.
Hi.
So my name is Andrea. I live in the community. I also have a 6 and 9-year-old that attend school at Basich. Ken, I heard you speak at the Basich board meeting and describe the program. And I felt obligated tonight to log on. One, you described this population as a population of homeless that needed the highest level of intervention. And I would actually question whether, I think Homeward Bound is probably considered a lower level of intervention or intermediate. Homeward Bound works to employ many of the homeless and get them back to working on their feet. So I'd like to hear a little bit of what highest level intervention versus lower and intermediate level intervention means. It was also represented at that meeting that sex offenders would not be eligible. That has been clarified tonight because sex offenders are eligible for housing, only currently registering sex offenders are not. And as of 2021, and I think everyone needs to understand this, California law changed and the majority of sex crimes defendants are eligible to petition to remove their sex requirement, sexual sex registration requirement. And so sex offenders are eligible for this housing. And my question to you is, as part of the coordinated entry, why are we not being more restrictive and prohibiting sex offenders and any violent criminals for that matter, people who commit murder, attempted murder, robberies from this program? You are placing 43 to 50 individuals in a community with very vulnerable populations. We have the elderly community that tends to live adjacent to that property. We also have 2 schools that are nearly adjacent to that property, children being a vulnerable population. Why, I'm asking you, why you are not restricting the populations to people who are homeless, have a disability, but are not convicted sex offenders or violent or serious offenders? Why do you not feel a need to protect not only the homeless, but the people that are currently living there from any collateral effects? So I sort of have 2 questions. What is highest level of intervention? And why are you not being more restrictive? If we have, apparently we have the 7th worst homeless problem per capita in the country. We should be able to be selective when we're putting people into this community, when we're dropping people into this community of vulnerable populations. Thanks.
Thank you. So just quickly on the highest level, I probably misspoke in using the term highest level. What I meant to say was the most vulnerable among those experiencing homelessness who are able to live independently. So there are individuals who are higher need, who require a higher level of care and move into board and cares and other facilities, all the way up to locked facilities. And so when I said the highest level, what I meant was the most vulnerable among those experiencing homelessness. So I probably didn't use quite the right words on that. So I want to clarify that. On the sex offenders, Ashley or Beth, are you able to jump in on that one?
I can speak briefly to our experience here in Marin, which is that the vast majority of the people that we're serving do not have those histories of sex offenses or violent criminal offenses that you're concerned about. That's not something we see super commonly among our population. Most of the folks that we're serving are sick people who are very medically fragile in lots of cases. This is not going to be a program that is like a halfway house from people coming out of prison or something like that. So I hope I can set your minds at ease a little bit about the population that we are serving. And I want to note that public urination can actually get you sex offender status. And that is something that does happen when you're sleeping unsheltered. People don't have another option. And so that's part of why that's not something that we screen out. There are lots of extenuating circumstances that don't lend themselves to blanket restrictions, but certainly we want to make sure that people are placed appropriately for their needs and for the needs of the surrounding community. When we place people in our permanent supportive housing units, we do it as a collaborative. We do it in what we call case conferencing. So I think Andrew and Ken mentioned this a little bit, but we actually get together, everybody who knows the client that we're placing, a case manager or anybody that might be working with an outreach worker, and we talk about their needs and what would be best suited for them in terms of a housing placement. So it's not random, it's not scattershot. We are as intentional as it's possible to be when we're matching people with housing opportunities.
Thanks for that, Ashley. Why don't we, I'm seeing in the Q&A and just getting, we're over halfway. So I still, we have 42 open questions. We've answered about 31. Some of these are a little bit duplicative and I'm trying to tie them together. So if I say I've answered your question, but you're not totally satisfied, feel free to ask it again or raise your hand. To slightly change gears, and we can certainly keep coming back to this, there are a number of questions in the chat around the finances. So sort of, how do we ensure the financial sustainability of this project? What does the operational side of this look like? This is an expensive project. How does this compare to other potential interventions? So I'm wondering if someone would be able to address kind of the financial model of all this and how it impacts what we're doing and what's lined up to date.
Kevin, do you want to take it at the first level, at the development level? Yeah, great.
Yeah, there was a lot in there. Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. Kevin Kitchingham, Director of Housing Development at Episcopal Community Services. So there are two major buckets of capital finance for this project. The first of which is the Home Key program. That's what we're teed up for to apply for this property. There's about $13 million that we're expecting to come through that program. That should cover the acquisition and some other work to happen to the property. There's about $7 million on top of that is required as a match from the county. We are working at other ways to also backfill that source with philanthropy as it becomes available, but that's the general dynamics. It's about $20.5 million, $21 million in total development costs for the property. As far as the operating side is concerned, I think Beth alluded to the HUD vouchers that will be coming into this program that, and someone else had mentioned fair market rent. I think Ken, you did. So those are fairly substantial rents that will be coming in. We'll also be getting a subsidy for the first 3 years from the state Housing and Community Development Division to help offset the expenses. Later on in the years that we would plan to operate this development, there would be a behavioral health subsidy that comes in for the services to supplant the state financing. A little hard to share over Zoom. I wish I had like a whiteboard plus a spreadsheet to walk you through it, but those are the general dynamics on the financing. And as many of you know on this call, it's, we're very subject to the marketplace and construction pricing and pricing of real estate and a number of other issues when you're trying to develop such a property with a high quality rehabilitation. So I think that generally covers those dynamics. I'm open to more specific questions, or there is no chat. I'm happy to share my email. We can get it up on some shared form, but feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any other questions.
Does anyone else want to add to that at all? One thing that I'm seeing in some of the questions in the chat is around the 30% of their income question. And just to add to what that means is, so basically the federal government and state governments have determined that quote unquote affordable housing is when a person doesn't spend more than 30% of their income towards their housing. So what we do with these properties and these units is we use vouchers or housing subsidies from places like the Marin Housing Authority, which is basically federal money that's coming to our community, which is really leveraged 3 to almost 4x of what we're spending locally for services, that we get this federal match and housing support. And what that means is that someone pays whatever their income is, they pay 30%. So even if their income for whatever reason is 0, they would be paying 0, but the subsidy still covers up to market rate. So that makes sure that no matter what someone's financial situation is, the program itself is still financially viable and we can still pay for services and operations. So I think that's a very important point that a lot of people seem to have asked about. So I do have one other kind of development related question, Kevin. There is some questions, including from Supervisor Rice and some other folks, to just maybe walk through. Maybe a lot of folks have been by the building, have seen the exterior of the building, but what does the inside look like? What are the rooms really like? Is there indoor space? Again, there's a lot of questions about the park but I think there's an indoor atrium. So if you want to describe the site a little bit for people, that might be helpful.
Yeah, so there are 2 interior courtyards that work much like an atrium. They do have glass roller doors. We'll look at that, rehabilitating that design or providing something similar. But there is that indoor congregate area. The site itself is, it is in a lovely part of town. Marin is beautiful. I mean, just the creek there. There's a lot of really like lovely natural beauty there. Inside the units, it's I've seen a lot worse in rehabilitation context. I think in general, the building has really great bones, the foundation's in shape. We just had the preliminary needs assessment come back in draft form to us. We see that, I'm very glad about this. Most of the building systems are in shape. The plumbing is in shape. The electrical is in shape. We're going to have to do some testing on short circuiting due to some vandalism that's taken place there. But in general, and I think Ken alluded to this earlier, one of the best fits here is the disability access piece to this, that it has the right doorway widths, that it has the corridor widths to accommodate both people in wheelchair and people in walkers. So it has that full sort of panoply of design characteristics that you would look for in a rehabilitation like this. There's also room for community room, a community kitchen, some services space, some private medical space. This is what we're doing right now in initial design, sort of planning out how to best service the program and make the building work. And then for the exterior, we're going to want to, make it nice, spruce it up, make it look a lot like the rest of our permanent supportive housing looks like, as a very sort of marketable, product that walks and talks like a market rate product. So I do want to put out, there is one of the limitations of the drought ordinance and how much and what you can put in front as far as landscaping. I think landscaping is really going to go quite a long way to making this a beautiful site. So we're going to be working on that with our designer. We do know of a prior project landscaper in one of the proposals that had some ideas around drought resistant species and how to make it really nice. But that would be something I think that would come about in some of the design charrette discussions or some of the further community team discussions. So I'm looking forward to hearing those inputs.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Why don't we go back to live attendees? So Janet, it looks like you're next. So I'm going to go ahead and promote you to panelist, and feel free to, again, share video or simply audio, whichever you're more comfortable with. And Janet, we see you, but it looks like you're still muted. So
sorry.
Oh, perfect. Here we go. Okay. Got you.
Here we go. Yes, I just was made aware of this project three days ago. And like many of us at our particular building, no one was notified of this. And it appears that all of you are making this a very rosy project, trying to convince us that this is really going to be a benefit to all of us and that it's going to be embraced and we're going to love it. And we're going to probably want to participate in maybe supporting the project. And it seems that you're placating us. And I know that there's many of us that feel very uncomfortable with this. You're providing waterfront property to those that have done nothing to contribute to the area, living next door to people that have worked extremely hard in their lifetime to have the very same things, the American dream, and now that has been paid for, and now it's being provided to those who have suffered in various ways, and for that it's very sad. It seems to me where other communities have taken motels through state funds and they've renovated them, retrofitted them, and in some areas where there are more motels together, the communities of homeless have lived in those kinds of environments. To inflict that upon a neighborhood that's already established, a way of life has been established here. Our family has lived in the same condominium for 46 years. I've seen many, many changes throughout the area. It used to be a very lazy little street. There wasn't a lot of traffic. It was mostly either convalescent homes like the building that you're talking about right now. And now We have a lot more traffic. There's a lot more construction that goes on with the sewer problems and that sort of thing. But also having a family member that was in law enforcement investigations in a prison for 24 years, surrounded by many friends that are law enforcement officers, administration, you know, we're being placated with all these little rosy stories of helping our neighbors. And many of people in the community do help and provide all kinds of services to those in need. But yeah, I guess it's a situation of not in my backyard, but it's not in an existing backyard, not in a place where we are an established community. Jean has mentioned it. Carolyn has mentioned it. Many of us walk our dogs very late at night because, you know, they do have to go out one time more. And I have seen a homeless person. They used to live across the street. He lived kind of behind the building, and that's really the only one I've ever seen. But I think it's unfair to us. And I also believe that we have no choice. It's already been rammed into this. You know, it's certainly convenient to say, well, you know, we're sorry, we sent out the letters, but we didn't get them. And we haven't even had time to process this, and you're already planning on having it be done. So really, we have no recourse, it's sounding to me. And when it goes in, if it doesn't work out, once they're in, they're very difficult to remove. And with a park right next door that all types of people, neighbors utilize, it also seems like it's an ideal place for these people to flow into and utilize and maybe push out the existing neighborhood. We have tons of kids now that drive and ride their bikes by and walk by 2-3 times a day. Elderly people like to sit on the park benches and visit with each other. So when it was a convalescent home, of course, it was very quiet. It was landscaped beautifully. Yes, it's blighted now. And as I stated in one of my little remarks, you know, there was a rehab group for women, and you know, they had a lot of their friends hanging around. They all smoked in the park. They sunbathed in the park, and it made other people feel uncomfortable. So, you know, we know what homeless is like, you know, and sex offenders, you know, right now, tens of thousands of criminals are being released just because, you know, they want to close down some of the prisons for whatever reason. So how are we really guaranteed who's going to be in these homes? So I just want to register my complaint, my rejection of the program, because I think it's unfair to put this upon a community and railroad it through by saying, oh yeah, we sent out everything and now you just have to kind of deal with it. Because you can paint a nice picture of it, but you know, all you have to do is drive by these kinds of things and see, you know, that they're not quite to the same level of living as the rest of the community. So I don't really have a question. I had a statement that was rather long, and I'm sorry. I did communicate to Katie Rice today. She sent me a very nice letter. Your intentions are wonderful, but we have the reality of it all. And, you know, talking to some of the people today and listening to some of their concerns, a couple of the waterfront properties, you can just walk right back there. You know, there's no safety to walking right up to somebody's deck in their condo. And this one particular person feels vulnerable. And we are concerned about property values are going for an extraordinary amount of money now. And when you say, yes, it's practically unaffordable to live here, we are experiencing that. You know, homeowners association dues are just rising and property taxes are rising. Everything's rising. So for us to still struggle to live here and then provide the same community to other people that don't have it, it just doesn't seem fair. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that disagree with me and there's a lot of people that do. So that's really all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Janet. I really appreciate that. And thank you for sharing, you know, the full kind of gamut of concerns about it. And I just want to really acknowledge, you know, in addition to your comments, again, some of these questions, I don't think we're just going to be able to have time to get through all the ones that are still open, but a lot of people just again, sharing that general sentiment of concern and, again, re-raising issues around the park and the safety of children. And again, questions about who we're placing there. So we just really, again, want to acknowledge, we certainly, all of us have been working in this space for a long time and have seen these kind of programs be successful and really help people. So, we certainly have a certain perspective on this, but again, obviously completely understand your concerns. And are really trying to do everything we can. I know it, again, this is way faster than typically any of us would ever really go through this process. So we're trying our best to make it work. I know that's not always, the best or feels like enough, but, we really are trying. And again, it's come up a few times, but tonight we will be sending a follow-up email out to people that are on the list. If you're not on the list, feel free to, again, reach out to me directly at andrew@openingdoorsmarin.org. You can also email homekey@marincounty.org. And either one of those will get your email. We'll put you on the mailing list. We'll keep you updated on everything that's happening moving forward. Again, it really is our goal to try to be open and transparent about this. And I know that can be hard. There are a lot of people in the area. And so if you or your HOA or whatever it is, wants to connect with us and talk more, have a small group discussion, really dive into some of these, really difficult questions, frankly, we're here and we're happy to speak with you. So with that, again, again, just want to really appreciate you for sharing your concerns, as well as other people that are in the Q&A that have also shared similar ones. Why don't we do another live person, and this person's Joe. So Joe, I'm going to promote you. And Joe, not to completely put you on the spot, but I know that we had a chance to connect earlier this week, actually. And you had actually mentioned that you'd been to some of our HomeKey One sites. So I don't know if at all you'd want to share your experience with how that went, maybe what you were thinking they might have been like, and then what you actually saw when you were there. So, or again, feel free to completely disregard that, but I thought it was a really interesting perspective you shared. So Joe, feel free to share video or unmute, and I'll turn it over to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, you and I talked, and as I mentioned, we had a lot of concerns, our homeowners group, and so I did go visit the Corte Madera site and the Bellum site in San Rafael, and quite frankly, I was impressed with the operation. I talked to the managers at the front desk and talked to them, and the improvements that you made to the property was quite frankly pretty attractive. I guess the concern I have, and after I walked away from it, my recommendation was nothing to worry about. It looks good. It's well managed. It's that. I'm a little concerned about this, and I, others are repeating this, but the sex offender thing. I asked, are there sex offenders? And I was told no. Well, I'm really surprised tonight. What's the difference between a lifetime sex offender and a regular sex offender? I don't feel I was given a straight answer on that. And I can really understand the concerns of these parents with these kids. I guess you can go on the web and there's a map of, where sex offenders are living. But I think I think the operation's great. I think the need is great. I relayed to you that, my wife and I were involved in helping people and whatnot. But that one issue is a big one. And I understand these folks with the kids. I've got young grandkids, and that's a big issue. And I don't know how you get around it, because, like you say, it's a federal requirement probably, but that's an issue.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. And thank you again for sharing your observation of having visited the Casa Buena and 3301 Kerner. I'll move you back over to attendee. And I know we have discussed this, and I continue to see the questions in the chat about this very issue. So I will turn it back over to the rest of the group to respond to this if someone wants to weigh in. The way I'm feeling at the moment, and I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees, is that we want to give you a very clear answer about this. And so we are planning a second information session. And as I just mentioned, we do have our follow-up list, and we're trying to push out information in other ways. I think it would probably be most helpful for our group to kind of regroup and really get a definitive answer around that. But again, I could be wrong. I don't know if others in the group feel differently and want to speak to it again.
No, I think you're right, Andrew. I think we need to circle and we need to have a tighter response to this question and deliver it both through the emails we've collected and FAQs on the website and at the next community meeting.
So I know that might not be totally satisfying to the public, but again, we really do want to get you the clearest information about what those policies mean. So that's our commitment from this meeting. We definitely hear you. And just like the park, and I think just like the concern for students and that integration with the school system, we're seeing your comments. We totally hear those concerns. I think as we're thinking about our community advisory committee, even maybe really putting some weight towards the educational partners that are in the neighborhood, making sure that their voice is represented. Because again, clearly this is something that's a concern for a lot of folks here tonight. It's in the comments, and we just, again, want to acknowledge that and have that commitment to follow up to you. So with that, why don't we do another? I want to make sure we have time for everyone that's raised their hand and wants to speak. So again, if we could try to keep our comments to about 2 minutes, we have about 20 minutes or so left. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael next. So Michael, I'm going to promote you. And again, feel free to share video or simply unmute yourself.
Hello.
Perfect. Yes. Hey.
Okay. I have a lot of concerns that the other people have had. Number one, I do want to ask you, if the community doesn't want this, will you withdraw your proposal? Is there any chance of that? The second question is, if this is a done deal, I think a lot of residents realize there's no upside for us. It's not going to make it a better place. We can only hope that it'll stay the same. And I just, if there are complaints, I'm afraid they're going to go unheard. I think somebody's going to get hurt. I think that, it could be a nuisance. And I don't think the police are probably going to be able to do anything about it. And that's what I think a lot of people are worried about. I mean, it pretty much is, because we've seen this. We've seen it throughout the country. The police are having their hands tied. Government has its hands tied. If you do get one or two bad apples in the facility, I think it's going to be a problem, because there are so many laws out there that prevent people from getting evicted, that protect their rights. We've got a lot of activists that are willing to step in and stop all that, and stop the community from taking the action it wants to. So that's, I like, you are a business, you are selling us something, and we're kind of having to buy it, and it's $455,000 a unit, and we're probably going to have to buy it. And I feel I didn't get a notice. I'm in 925. We didn't get a notice. So I feel like we're being manipulated.
Michael, I definitely appreciate your comments. Thank you for that. And maybe to this, because this question also came up in the chat. I'm wondering if someone maybe can speak to this feeling of, is this a done deal, or sort of, I guess more generally, what is the process moving forward? And what are the next kind of milestones?
Yeah, we got approval from the County Board of Supervisors last week to submit an application to the state. What that does is gives us permission to apply for a slot. And now we're in a competitive, we're in a competition. We'll be judged by the state, and they'll decide whether we're granted the property or not. It'll also be subject to appraisal and negotiations on the property. And then would have to go back to the Board of Supervisors ultimately to appropriate the funds to make the deal final and to purchase the property. So there's one more opportunity for it to go before the Board of Supervisors for the County of Marin. That's the process, and that would be if we were awarded if our applications was successful with the state of California. So that all remains to be seen. So there is more process moving forward. That's where we are in that process. So we'll apply in November and likely here in December if we're successful or not, and would have to go back to our board ultimately for that purchase.
Thank you for that, Ken. And I saw there were a couple of just quick questions in terms of state reps. I mean, there's certainly Senator McGuire and Assemblymember Levine if people wanted to reach out to their office about the home key program generally. Let's next go to Rachel. And again, it looks like we have about 5 people who are still queued up to speak. So again, if folks could keep their comments or questions to about 2 minutes, I want to make sure we have time to then respond and kind of have any final closing remarks. So Rachel, I believe you're getting promoted over, or I will try this again. Here we go. Oh, declined to be promoted. Okay. Okay, it looks like, well, we'll come back. So Larry, why don't I go to you next? So I and just hit promote. So again, we have about 6 people left. So if we could just maybe maybe like minute or 2 would be really appreciated to make sure we can respond to your questions. Larry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm a neighbor. I own a unit 2 doors down. I'm extremely concerned about the size of your project. You've talked about the success of a 12-unit building fitting in, or 12-unit property fitting into a neighborhood nicely. And 12 units sounds great to us. We're not against helping the homeless with a very supervised program, which yours does not sound supervised enough. And the big issue for us really is the size of the project. There is no building on this street that houses that many people. So I understand that it's an economic issue for you who are applying for it, that the building costs X amount of dollars. You need to have X amount of units to justify that price. To me, that says this is not an appropriate project. And I can't imagine one of you living next door to this project that would think 50 units, 43 units, whatever final number you come up with is appropriate. It is way too many people. The park, many people have mentioned the park being an issue. That park will be overrun by the residents of this project, which takes out the people that are using the park now. So there's so many things against this. On top of it, other people have mentioned this. We did not receive any notification of this project by mail. We live 2 buildings away. So one person said that we felt like you were placating us, and that's certainly it. And the person, I think, asked a question: is there any way that you would, with input from the neighborhood, that you would pull this proposal? Because it doesn't seem like you have the support of the neighbors, nor did you actively ask the neighbors about this project. So size is a huge issue, as the fact that it's being rushed through because you have to meet a deadline. That's not appropriate for the citizens of Larkspur, Greenbrae.
Thank you, Larry, for that comment. There was a number of questions in the chat about this issue of the size and being able to ensure that kind of intensive wraparound services that we've been talking about. So I know that there were some attempts at answering that, but I'm wondering if maybe Beth, you'd want to speak to this of how do you make sure when projects are, like this, that you have those kind of wraparound services that folks need?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we work really hard to ensure that there's a reasonable ratio of case managers to, folks that are in the building. So with the 1:17 ratio, we feel like that's a good ratio. We're bringing in folks that generally are going to have behavioral health experience. Social workers generally are going to be the folks that are going to be on site, as well as clinicians. And so that's one big piece of it is that the behavioral health services are located on site of the property, and also the care coordination is on site. Not to mention the property managers who are also on site. In addition to that, as I had alluded to earlier, we're really seeking to partner with healthcare partners. We're in community clinics across the street, as well as Ritter Center across the creek, to help us provide specialty healthcare, as well as other services that they offer in the community presently. We're also looking at in-home support services, which is a state program to support people while they're living in their unit who may struggle with daily tasks like laundry or food preparation, things like that. Supportive housing works because it's supportive, and it's meant to be able to provide folks with the type of linkages to services, but on-site services that they really need to stabilize in their housing, which is why it's supportive housing.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth. Why don't we go to Mark? So Mark, I'll go ahead and promote you to panelist. And feel free to share audio or video.
Hi. Wanted to make a couple quick comments and then ask either Kevin or Beth a couple of specific questions. One is, there's a lot of neighborhood concern, and I think one of the concerns is that sometimes we're hearing mixed messages, and I want to highlight 3 mixed messages that we've heard. One is that the county has in fact already committed $1 million to this project. So this is basically a done deal. I can't imagine the county backing out of this after committing $1 million at the most recent meeting. And that wasn't what was indicated in a recent question. Another thing that is unclear is the sex offender issue. And another thing that was unclear is the definition of the types of residents that are going to end up in this facility in terms of their levels of need. So you're saying some good things, but you're saying some things that make me as a member of the community not trust you. So I hope that you really straighten out your message and only tell us things that you know to be true and not try to mislead people. It's very frustrating. Secondly, my second comment real quick is this is a facility appropriate for families. It's not a facility appropriate for single individuals. It's a family neighborhood. It's near a park. It's near schools. This facility should be hosting 12, 15 families, not individuals. Everything that a family needs is right there. I would love it if it hosted families. Finally, I have a couple of specific questions for probably Beth, maybe Kevin. One, in your prior projects, what percentage of the clients work? And number 2, I'd like to hear an example of someone being evicted for breaking a rule and someone being evicted for breaking the law. So that's kind of 3 questions. One of them is a 2-part question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And as I mentioned earlier, we are tracking all of the questions that have come up and are continuing to try to refine the FAQ, and we'll be sending out additional information. Because again, we definitely hear you. We want to make sure we're getting you as direct an answer as possible. Ashley, do you want to start? And then Beth, we'll go from there.
Sure, I can answer the question about how many folks who are experiencing homelessness are working. It's about 1/3 of folks in Marin who are homeless are working. I want to note that most of the people that we're serving are folks who are severely disabled, many of whom are receiving disability income. So typically in our programs, either folks are working or are on disability income, which typically means they're not able to work.
And Beth, did you want to address the other questions?
Evicted based on a rule, that would look like generally, something as germane as not paying, rent over a period of time. We really work hard to ensure that people can stay in their housing. But if, people are responsible for paying 30% of their income. So that type of rule is something that, we generally really try and support people to pay that rent, and to pay their utilities, because that is a responsibility of the person who's on the property. But that could be something over time that we would want to work with somebody on, but that's a pretty basic rule. In terms of eviction based on a crime, it could be something that looks like 2 neighbors get into an argument or dispute, or someone is threatening to another person, and the other person feels threatened by that argument. Then that could be the cause for someone to be evicted from the property, depending on what that looks like.
Thank you, Beth. I'm going to go ahead and promote Linda to join as a panelist. So Linda, I'm transferring you over. And feel free to share video or audio. Linda, we see you've joined, but we don't hear anything. So give it another second or two. If you want to unmute in the bottom left. Okay, I'm going to move you back to attendee just for now, and we'll try to circle back. So let's try Claudia. I will promote you here now. So, okay, here we go. So Claudia, again, feel free to unmute or share video, whichever you're more comfortable with.
Hi, I'm Claudia, and I live on South Eliseo. We did not receive any notice of this at all. I just want to support Mark's comments on this. It would be so much more suitable to have this for families. It would fit much better into the neighborhood. And one of the answers that I just, maybe you answered it and I just didn't hear it. You say you have a very high rate of success in integrating your tenants into these kinds of settings, but nothing's perfect. And out of, say, 50 people, what do you do? What do we do? What do you do with the one or two who become an issue in I'm sure they have tenants' rights, but are you prepared to step in and help resolve the situation? You said you're working with the police. Are they, are they prepared to do something? Are there things in between? Was my question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Claudia. Appreciate that. I might actually turn it over to Ashley. Do you want to speak a little bit again about our systemic approach to supporting people and MASH and the provider network?
Sure. We have a really fantastic collaborative here in Marin that actually is unique in terms of, I've worked in a number of different communities doing this same work, and I've not seen such a close collaboration anywhere else. We have a robust data sharing policy for the clients that we're serving. They sign a release of information that allows us to speak across agencies so we can wrap people in support. So if there are issues, we can identify them early. If somebody is housed in a program, or maybe that program doesn't have a long history with that person, we can, and they start to maybe have a little bit of trouble, then the housing program could reach out to the rest of the collaborative, where typically somebody knows that person pretty well, because this is a small community and we know the folks that we're talking about here, and can help address that problem in a very tailored, specific way for that particular client. It has been very successful for us since we've started collaborating and wrapping people in this kind of support. We've seen immense success with the population we're serving.
Thank you for that. There was a quick question I want to make sure we address, which was the number of units and sort of that dynamic of it. So maybe two parts of it, I guess, again, maybe sort of the development dynamics. Kevin, that would be to you about just like the current configuration. And then also, Ken, I don't know if you want to address, kind of, again, benchmarking to other affordable housing throughout the county and even the region that, by comparison, this actually is, even though it's expensive, relatively more affordable. So if you all want to touch on that.
Sure, I can jump in, or Ken, did you want to?
You can go first, Kev.
Okay, great. So, and could you, Andrew, on the layout, what specifically was the question on the layout? I didn't quite catch all of it. You cut out.
I think just, again, the question of, a smaller number of units, maybe for families or something like that. Kind of changing the fundamental structure of the building.
Sure. I mean, the fundamental structure of the building, yeah, you would reduce units if you had to, make the existing footprint larger in order to accommodate families. You would need bedrooms, most namely, and I think a bit more robust living area and whatnot. So there would be an increase in unit size. So you would lose a number of individuals, number of units. So there is that out there. I think as far as the comparison, on a cost basis, it's actually quite competitive with anything else that's out there. I have to admit with the group here, and people pointing this out, land is still very expensive. So that is, of any project, that is a lion's share of the portion of total development costs. But we have been able to estimate fairly well where the rehab will be. We like what we see in the preliminary needs assessment for the building to bring it up to a high standard. So I think there's a cost-efficient rehab to be had there, especially given the state of the building systems, as we talked about earlier, and the layout as it exists now. So I think we're able to do fairly well on the construction side, which I think there's a bit more competition in the marketplace right now, and that we'll have some good definition to get a strong bid and get those numbers tightened up. So, I mean, I could speak to the rest of the state is seeing $600,000 total development costs, $700,000 total development costs. I have seen instances in some of the high cost areas of $1 million of total development costs. So as far as the total development cost per unit and as a general, capital outlay, this is an incredibly cost efficient project. And I'd be happy to compare those numbers even with some of the Central Valley projects where labor is a little cheaper. So anyway, that's generally it. Happy to discuss it further if anyone else wants.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And just to share some of the other local projects in Marin. So there was a project, Victory Village in Fairfax, that was it was between $600,000 and $700,000 per unit new development. So if we're kind of anchoring to that as a possible other financial expenditure, this is more competitive, even though, again, it is very expensive. And just one other quick anecdote, I think it's just the moment that we're in with supply chain disruption and so forth, is Homeward Bound has also been building a new permanent supportive housing project in San Rafael. Those costs have gone up millions of dollars just the past 18 months because of lumber and other basic supplies that no one could have foreseen. So that's a huge issue for any of these sites. So we have about 3 minutes left and we have 3 hands up. So why don't we do Rachel, Randy, and Amanda? You will be our last speakers tonight. And again, if you could please keep it to about a minute or so per comment. You will be the last 3 again, Rachel, Randy, and Amanda. So Rachel, I will go ahead and promote you right now. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. And it's very informative tonight. And I can understand the needs why we need to help with people, the homeless folks. But I also have a really great concern about the plan of embedding this site into a neighborhood that is so deeply surrounded by kids and seniors. So we are next to Hamilton Park and Queenside Park, and we are also very close to Basage Elementary School, Kent School, and also Marine Catholic School. So so many kids, they really play in the parks like Queenside Park without parent supervision. And kids also walk home from walk home back and forth to the school. And just how we can ensure the safety for the kids. And what is what happened if the residents start and use a substance at the park nearby or around? So it's just that thing about if they're your kids, you were concerned about this as well. So as parents of 2 kids at the Canfield School District, I'm extremely concerned about this project. And I'm also a little bit frustrated about how we can have our voice heard. So my question would be, so going forward for this project, how we can have our voice be heard, and you will take into our concerns about the things we share with you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Rachel. We really appreciate your comments. And again, we'll be having another session, and I think we have touched on a little bit of this tonight, but we totally hear what you're saying. So let's do Randy and then Amanda, and then we will close it out for the evening. So Randy, let me go ahead and promote you, and Rachel, I will put you back to attendee.
Hi, this is Randy Collins. I live right across the street, right across the creek from this facility. Every single direct, pointed question that's been asked tonight, you failed to answer. You've been asked numerous times verbally and in the chat, will you withdraw support due to community opposition? Answer the question, yes or no.
Ultimately, the decision on the support for this is up to the County Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for answering the question.
Thank you, Randy.
I've also noticed that there's no backup. There's just talk. There's not like, here are the statistics of the crime that happens when we drop this kind of facility this big in this kind of neighborhood. I've worked so hard to get away from this stuff. This is why I left San Francisco, is to not be in the Tenderloin, to not have this in my neighborhood. And every single person here, you're not putting this in your neighborhood. You're putting it in my neighborhood. Why in the world are you doing this? You didn't notify anybody. Nobody knew that the Board of Supervisors were giving this money out. And you're just sitting there nodding your head going, yeah, oh, thank you, Randy. This is so disingenuous. Own up to it. You're just blowing everybody over. You've got a business, and it's not hamburgers, it's homeless, whatever. It's just another business. And you're going to bring a bunch of crime and a bunch of problems into my neighborhood, and you don't have any accountability to it. It's just going to be my problem to deal with.
Randy, appreciate that.
I don't say you appreciate it. Stop.
I mean, I definitely hear your concern. I really do. I mean, I know you're frustrated. I know a lot of folks are. So I do want to hear from Amanda.
But you say you appreciate that I'm frustrated, but you're going to do everything you can to ram 50 homeless people into my neighborhood.
I think we've tried to be as transparent as possible tonight about the process.
You haven't.
So, all right, Randy, I've got to bump you back to attendee. I got to bump you back. I'm sorry, man. All right, Amanda, last comment or question.
Okay, so you have not been transparent. First off, I'd like to say who here was responsible for actually notifying everybody on South Eliseo, because our HOA board didn't get it, our property manager didn't get it, and nobody in any of our units got it. So who here was responsible to sending all those letters that nobody got?
Hi, Amanda. This would be me, Zach. I think I addressed your question in the chat as well. And we will be following up at this point with USPS to make sure there was not an issue with the delivery of the letters.
I don't think it's a problem with USPS. No letters were received. Second.
So, okay. So thank you for that. Again, we have heard from a lot of folks from the chat tonight about the communication, and this event and the event on the 4th. These are all going to be attempts to try to, again, engage with the community, gather your feedback, and we're trying to collect emails and push out this information as best we can. So, so it's 8:03. I want to respect everyone's time this evening. We knew that it would be a very robust conversation, and obviously we couldn't get to every question and comment that came up. So I really appreciate everyone that was able to join and stick it out through this whole event. Again, we will be meeting on the 4th, same time. There is a different Zoom link. So if you'd like to sign up for the notification listservs that we've created, again, you can either contact me directly, andrew@openingdoorsmarin.org, or you can also email homekey@marincounty.org. And we will definitely get you on that mailing list that we've been creating. And I think that's it, unless there are any other final comments or thoughts from the panel. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.